We've got a fun topic here for you all, and we'll definitely get through. It's a bit of a heavy topic to get through, but great panelists today, and we're really going. The name of this event is kind of big and long, but basically we're going to go through a better strategic framework to really think about how you go from no handbook to a handbook, and then from there what you do with that handbook and how to really make an impact on your employees. Before I really get into, before I introduce our panelists, I do want to just get a sense of those in the room and those joining us virtually. I do have like a few like poll questions just to see where we're at. So Puck, are you gonna cue that up now? Oh, lovely. I can't even see that behind me. Oh, it's in front of me. Got it. So first one on there. So for those attending virtually, please, answer the poll here. And for those in the room, feel free to do that, or also just raise your hand, depending on how you feel. So first question, do you have a company handbook? It's a great place to start, especially since this is on the founders track. There might be some of us who just have not even thought about this. So there's a yeah, there's a no, and I don't think so. Great, great answers. Cool, coming in now. Oh, Stalin, good morning. I'm seeing the chat there. All right, so just general mix, but yeah, we're a little all over the place. We'll cover all these today. Some yes, some no, some I don't think so. We'll get into that in a bit. Great. Next question. Puck, if you mind moving that over. Will basically be around how often, if you have a handbook, how often do you reference that company handbook from time to time? Is it something that you just kind of sign on your first day, acknowledge that you've received it? Or is this something that you go back to from time and time again? Absent of any answers here, I'm sure that all of us, we might know that there's a handbook. We'll cover all that in the session. The final question is really, if you have a handbook, do you like your handbook? Love it. Man, it's okay. Got it. I appreciate that. So so those virtually can answer. For those in the room, do you like your company handbook if you have one? Yes. Yeah. What about it is one that makes you raise your fist in triumph? Okay, that is important. For those who couldn't hear, the handbook is very easy for employees to follow, which is great. And so going back to the poll, looks like definitely the handbook definitely needs some love. Do we have a company handbook? Cool. So glad to hear that there's a range of folks and backgrounds here. Would love to give it on over to our panelists. First, I'm going to have Emma Brunner joining us virtually. Hi, Emma. As we get started this morning, I wanted to just ask, hey, give us a quick intro and maybe a quick summary of a handbook policy that you rolled out.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Emma Brudner. I'm thrilled to be here. I am the Director of HR at Process Unity. Currently about 260 employees spread all over the US, and we have some international presence as well. And let's see. So the bulk of my HR experience has been in, pretty early stage companies, startups. So it's a lot of building policy from scratch. I've rolled out a few different handbooks at this time, going from nothing to something. And I would say an example of a policy that I've rolled out, I've done the COVID policy at two different companies, once in 2020 in the thick of it, and then a little bit after. And it was definitely an interesting policy. It was something that you had to do on the fly. Everyone was sort of figuring it out at the same time. But we knew we needed to get something in place and just, get it out, and we can always iterate from there. based on current CDC guidance. So that was definitely an interesting experience, as I'm sure many of my other panelists can relate.
Got it. Thank you, Emma. No, would love to start all the way down on my right, Zarina.
Sure. So recently I wrote a generative AI like code of conduct. So I used ChatGPT to generate the first draft, and then I, put it in Google Docs and shared it with my team, and we edited it to make it more specific to drift. So it's not in the handbook yet, but the next rollout, it was distributed, but now we'll roll it out for acknowledgement like we do twice a year.
Got it. Thank you, Zarina. And Zarina is on as a legal counsel over at Drift here in Boston. Just going down.
Good morning, y'all. I'm Pooja Samuel Murphy. I am the People Operations Manager at Easy Llama. We are an HR tech company with a specificity on compliance. So this session feels very appropriate for what we do for work. I've been in people operations for the last 5 years. Similar to Emma, most of my experience has been in early stage startups and scaling them up. We recently just rolled out a communication policy. We are in that sweet spot of going from 25 to 50, where communication now really does matter because we're adding middle management and other layers for the organization. So really important that folks understand how to use the right channels and how to communicate appropriately. And then we're also in the midst of rolling out or drafting a digital nomad policy, which is really exciting for our team. I'm excited to roll that out as a benefit for our folks as well.
Thank you, Pooja. Dustin?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Dustin G. I'm a manager of people at Fountain. We're headquartered out of San Francisco, but we're globally distributed in a fully remote company. We're in the HR tech space as well. So great to see so many HR tech companies representing here at Boston Startup Week. We're in the software as a service. We provide an applicant tracking system that's largely focused on helping mid-market and large enterprise companies really rethink hourly hiring and some of the differences that go into that versus recruiting for knowledge or salaried workers. And I guess I'd say like a recent policy that we've worked on incorporating into our handbook and doing a lot around tied to culture is pay transparency. At the end of last year, California passed their Pay Transparency Act. And so we quickly moved to be able to include salary ranges for any job opening we were actively recruiting for. But then also thought, well, what does that mean internally when your employees are now, maybe applied for a job at a time when they didn't see a pay range included? So really spending a lot of time thinking about how do we help our foundeers understand our compensation philosophy, what goes into determining where they're at and why they're making what they're making. And then how do we provide them with visibility into the pay scale sort of band and grade that they're at and what that means for their growth at Fountain should they continue to stay with us as a founder. So interesting policy that was just really timely and a really fun one to work on. So a lot of favorable responses to what we've done there.
Awesome. Really excited to have all these panelists here with us today. I neglected to introduce myself earlier. I'm Jason Wu. I'm the people ops, or just I like to say I'm the HR guy at a small robotics company out in Watertown. I was employee number 20. I think I still have that. Yep. And we're looking to come out of stealth mode soon. And my previous experience was at very large tech companies, and going from multinational corporations to a small startup has been jarring, but yet very refreshing. So I'm happy to again be on this wonderful panel, and thank you, Startup Boston. For those of you in the chat, hi Karen and Amkar, thank you for joining us. We do have a lot of fun questions to get through. If you have any questions, if you're joining us virtually, feel free to put that in the chat, and I'll see if I can pepper that into the conversation. And so, as I promised, definitely want to take us through, going from a binary situation of having a handbook to, having some semblance of a handbook, and then going from there. How do you then use that to provide value and really craft culture at your organization? So, just to get us started here, sorry, this is the question now to our panelists. When should a company start thinking about creating a handbook? So for those of us who responded to the poll, hey, I don't think we have one, or we definitely don't. When should they start thinking about writing one?
I would say when there's enough people that you feel like you want to ensure consistency across your approach, and it's hard to do, kind of like how you were talking about, when it's smaller, it's easier to keep the same message the same with the smaller group of people. But when you're at the point where people are in different places or different positions and you need to ensure consistency, I would say probably like the 150 employee stage.
Wow, 150. We're at around 30 at Saturday Robotics, and we've used and sort of outside counsel to get that done. And so there's not going to be a path that is the most ideal way for things. Just whatever makes the most sense at the time. Anyone else want to add anything else?
I think for me, industry also matters. Prior to my current role, I was working in cannabis, and cannabis has a lot of regulation that comes with it. So not only are you thinking about employee law, but you're also thinking about the law as it relates to cannabis within the state. So we actually rolled ours out even before I had like 5 people, because hiring is tied to cannabis and tied to regulation there. So you have to be mindful of, like, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion that goes into hiring in the cannabis space. So we actually rolled that out very early at Easy Llama. I think it was about 20 people when we formalized, like actually spoke to our general counsel and then formalized a handbook. Prior to that, we had like a little bit of policy up in Notion.
Yeah. Wonderful. Now, my exposure to various company handbooks have been these like pretty long documents that you just kind of sign off and acknowledge, on your first sort of week at an organization. How do you start that conversation with either an outside counsel to start that conversation? Emma, I'm going to lob this over to you, as you have some experience, crafting a handbook without having that general counsel with you.
Yeah. So 2 of the handbooks I've done in the past have been, we've started with outside counsel. And really, I think it's important to think about all the locations your employees are in, right? I imagine everyone in the room now, our employees are all over the place. So, local regulations are very important to include. So with my outside counsel, I provided, okay, here's a list of locations for people. And then knowing that at the very base minimum, this has to be, legally compliant, right? So please start with like what has to legally be in here. And then what was great about the outside counsel I used was that she provided options within those policies, right? To the extent that you have options, you could say, okay, you can do this, this, or this. And then that's sort of the way that you can, okay, what's going to fit best with our culture within something that we know is still, right, legally sound. I will say too, one thing that Pooja said in terms of industry is also really important. So my company right now is in the governance, risk, and compliance space. And specifically, we're targeting our ideal customer is, huge Fortune 500 companies that are very, very regulated. And so a lot of times on RFPs, when we're competing for business, they're asking us about what policies we have internally, right? So that was the other thing, is that our handbook for process unity, it is fairly lengthy for a company of our size. But that said, our employees understand we need to have these things in writing, even just to compete for business, right? With our large enterprise customers.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I never really think about a handbook as being like a differentiating factor, on the business side. And I think it's just really cool, with a lot of us working in HR and legal, that, we can have a seat at the table when it comes to just company governance and company success. And for the founders in the room, this is a friendly reminder to check on your people operations, HR people, legal people. Say like, hey, are you feeling supported? All that good stuff. So I do want to turn it over to the rest of our panel here. For those of you who've had experience, working with that outside counsel or general counsel, however you want, however your relationship is there. Pooja.
Yeah, absolutely. So we outsource. We don't have a general counsel internally. Easy Llama is based out of California, so our general counsel is based out of California as well. Generally, California and federal law tend to be similar-ish, so that makes life a little bit easier for me when I'm creating. But for us, we have a very legal handbook. So the things like addendums, like Emma was mentioning, for different states are all very, very legal. But then our parental leave policy is more in our messaging. Our PTO policy is more in our messaging. So they're run past general counsel to make sure that they follow the law, and then I will go through and edit them so that they sound like us, so that our team isn't like, what am I actually reading here? This sounds nothing like us. So there are definitely those policies I think that folks do access more frequently, parental leave, PTO, expenses, things like that they're checking more frequently. Those I really do want those policies to sound like us versus like their state addendums for, wage and hourly is very legal.
When I started at Saturday Robotics a couple years ago, the handbook was just a boilerplate thing that we got from our outside counsel, and it was very difficult to inject the culture into that. So but like our panelists have said, it's a sort of balancing act between legal and like creating that culture. And so now we've talked about making a handbook. What happens when there's like a new policy you want to create? Where do you start? Does it really matter where you start on that sort of balance, on that scale? Like if you're saying, hey, I want to create a new like paid family leave policy, what lens do you start with? Curious about where all of you have started from.
I would say because paid family leave is so legal and there's so many like kind of strict components to it. Like I'd start with an outline of what's absolutely required, and then, like you said, kind of go through and translate whatever is possible into plain English without losing the meaning or losing like the teeth or enforceability of the policy, and then add personality wherever possible.
Got it. And so follow-up question for you here, Dustin. What are you going back to your pay transparency policy? That started out as being very legal. How did you make that what was the sort of communication following that to have it just be more in line with culture and having employees feel like they are being taken care of?
Yeah, so one of the core values and things we talk a lot about at Fountain is leading with unconventional transparency. So whether it's compensation, whether it's our performance management process, whether it's real-time feedback. So there's some core things that tie back to a lot of what drives us when we're informing or updating or adding new policies or thinking about how it is we as a company want to move forward as a business from a cultural sort of internal business excellence standpoint. I think that for us in January, it was an interesting time because we had a whole plan set and ready to go, but then we were really slowing down hiring. And so we thought, well, gosh, we're not even going to have like a ton of job postings out there. So it's just going to be important that we kind of communicate out with our immediate hiring managers who we knew and L team leaders that were going to be overseeing those hires as well about our process of listing out so that they could get out ahead of their with their staffs and let them know like, hey, you're going to start to see some ranges included in job descriptions. Here's a little bit about why. So we didn't take the approach of like, let's release something to the entire company and kind of get everyone all like in whatever ways they may have interpreted, because we were also still thinking through it because we were trying to tie it back to, again, total compensation. And so our annual performance cycle starts in February, wraps in March. And so we thought, gosh, what a great way and opportunity to roll this out to the business so that as we go through that performance cycle, at the end of it, every employee will be given, details on what that means, where they're at. And then we were also in the process of building out job architecture and leveling connected to pay grades. So there was a lot there that we were trying to do behind the scenes to get set up. But when it came to communicating it out to the business, simplicity is what really worked best. It's easy for us to get bogged down in things like comp ratios and all that, but we really tried to refrain from making it complicated for our business to understand and be very simplistic. And if anyone had questions, because we lead with that unconventional transparency, they can write to us, they can speak to their manager, like, hey, I saw this range. Gosh, I had no idea that my, the high point for the role that I'm in is X. Like, how do I get there? So it was really designed to help sort of spark conversations because it was tied directly to our performance management cycle, sort of annual year and bonuses and reviews and things like that. So had we, let's say, this came out and like we needed to do it by July 1st, like it probably would have been a different rollout just because
Sure.
of the timing. So I think for a lot of it can come down to timing and what makes sense for you.
Yeah, and like Dustin mentioned, the companies at Fountain, they have these sort of core values, and though the core values does not need to be, the core value that you are referencing does not need to be, quoted in each and every sort of program that you roll out. It is important to kind of call back to that to create that environment for your employees. Now, that last part that you mentioned is a great segue into the next part. Is like when you have a handbook, when you're starting to make changes to it, what are some sort of programs or processes outside of a handbook that will really help reinforce certain parts of that? I know that's going to change company to company, but what are some ways to just really get folks to understand what's in that handbook and that operation? Emma, I'll lob this back over to you.
Yeah. I think it's a matter, at least at my size and scale of company, it's a matter of repetition and just making sure that people know that we have a handbook and where it is, right? We also have a company intranet, right? And I take all new hires through, this is available to you at any time. Here's the bookmark. I tell people I'm the only HR person at my company right now. So I tell people, you're always welcome to come chat with me directly. But if you're more of a self-serve person, these things live here. And then just being mindful of any kind of training you do, any getting in front of managers. I usually will reserve a space for FAQs questions I've heard from around the organization. And if that ties back to a policy, always just reminding people again, chief reminder officer over here, this is in the handbook. If you ever need to reference it, it lives on the intranet or here. It's a really matter of repetition and reinforcing any time that you have, FaceTime with folks.
Yeah, Dustin, how about yourself? I have sounds like you have from our meeting before this. Sounds like you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah. I think that so just to clarify, in regards to the communication.
Communication. How do you roll things out? How do you ensure? What are some things outside of the handbook besides that are other touch points?
Yeah, I think it's easy to take the perspective of a handbook is not designed, maybe isn't always necessarily viewed as some big sexy document, right? In HR it is, we love it, we love people ops, it very much is a very core part of our work. Oops, sorry, that might be my alarm. So I think that for us too, one of the big challenges we've had to think through and we've spent a lot of time investing in lately is we're fully remote. We're globally distributed. We have employees all over the globe with the bulk of that workforce sitting in the US. How do we make information accessible? Because we cannot predict when an employee is going to be wanting to look into a specific policy, or when you're onboarding employees in 5 different time zones in one day, where and how they access that information. So making it something that really is accessible and that's easy to be able to navigate and get through. So longer the days, I feel like for us, where we just have a big expansive PDF, we've definitely tried to bring some more user-centric sort of modalities into it. So with Notion, that's our primary sort of internal intranet per se, tool for housing employee information. We've really invested in building out pages that distilled the information down based on categories that are relevant. We have the legal compliance stuff there that needs to be, but we've just presented it in a way and really thought about the language. So that's a key part of it. Also just where and how folks can access us. So I'm sure most of us are using tools like Slack, right? So just sending an email. And again, especially when you want a speedy response, email sometimes can take a little bit longer to get through, especially when you're a limited staff or you're a single people or HR shop. So, finding ways and tools for employees to be able to communicate out and to ask questions, or not knowing like, okay, I don't need to send in a great big email about this. This can easily be a, we have a hashtag inform channel at Fountain. And so anything like company-wide that we're informing folks about is going through there. And then the expectation and practice is that folks are going to emoji it or like it or add a comment, or, we'll also relay it to L teams to say like, hey, we're releasing this we're releasing this announcement about a specific policy or change in our handbook. Here's the link, and just want to make sure at your next team meetings, you're reiterating this as a part of the agenda. So
yeah, definitely.
Those are some of the things that I think we're doing to try to get information out there and share out when we have updates.
Yeah, I just want to call it like that theme of ease of access and just readability. Not everyone has the, I shouldn't say ability, but not everyone has that familiarity with, reading legalese and then distilling that into information that is, that is useful to them and others. So having those various touch points is very important. I do also want to call out that really having people managers be the sort of scaffold in which you roll out various programs and processes, because depending on your size, and depending on how big your HR team is, Emma, you are a team of one, right? And you cannot always be regurgitating back information to folks, right when they need it. And so having those modalities of communication and having those policies very easily visible can definitely be important for that. So just wanted to call out that theme. And with that, I do want to go to our first virtual question. Thank you, Mr. Stan Tomlinson. He asks, what kind of interaction within the C-level goes on, especially when there are differences of opinion? So now we're getting into, when you have a handbook, what sort of feedback are you getting, not just from the employee side, but when you are creating these policies, what are some of the roadblocks that you have before you even roll something out?
Sure, I can start. It's funny because our co-founders at the time we rolled out our handbook, they were very passionate about how it looked, how it read, how it be. They had examples for us of like Zappos and other companies where they really liked the handbook. So they were probably more involved than some C-suite members might be. But that's kind of why, we took boilerplate stuff from outside counsel. We also really sat there and looked at each policy and thought, like, how do we want to do this as a company? How do we feel about it? What principle does it tie to? And then, there are places where you just have to push back and be like, well, this is what the law is. So I'm sorry you don't like it, but like, this is why it's good for this company. This is why it's important. This is why it's fair. And just, help them understand.
Got it. Now, and then on the other hand, how do you get buy-in for certain policies or programs that are not necessarily, with the threat of being sued or audited? I'm going to give our panelists time to think about that too.
I think it goes back to that question of like, who are we and like, what do we want to be? And the HR team is a really helpful ally for that, because they're generally, they represent like the employees. They can do it in a more like persuasive and like people forward manner than just like a lawyer.
Oh, sure. Yeah. My, I guess, quote, best friend at work is our, head legal counsel. Not just because she's a great person, but she also just helps, just with a lot of that, just to, give HR that understanding, and then, going through a quick little, people sort of framing to make it a little more digestible. So thank you, Stan. I mean, it just seems like there is some, I guess there is some compromise that needs to happen, but very much so it's going to depend on how involved the C-suite wants to be. Great, and then I guess
Jason,
yes, Emma, go ahead.
Could I just chime in quickly?
Please
yeah,
do.
Thank you. Yeah, based on what Zarina said in terms of like tying it back to your values, I had a CEO who used the framework of what do we want to be known for. So we have our company values and these are the things we really believe in. And beyond that, like, what do we want our employees to say about us and what do we want to be known for? And I feel like communicating that to the C-suite helps it make a little bit easier decisions in terms of policies. Like, for example, because you don't want to be known for everything, right? And you can't be known for everything. So it's almost like it helps you sort of narrow down, like, okay, where are the things that, yeah, we are going to be a little bit more generous than what's, legally allowed, right? Versus there's some areas that, you know what, actually, that's not as important to our employee base, or that's not as important to like what we're building here. So then the legal minimum is going to work there, right? So that I always think is a helpful question to ask the C-suite to help them frame, like, what do we want to accomplish with these policies?
Because it's never like a fun answer when an employee asks you a question to answer like, well, that's like the minimum that's legally required to specify, right? Like you should have a better answer ready than that.
Sure. Yeah, could only imagine, like, it's like, why is it this way? Oh, because we have to. Fair enough. And I guess coming down from the C-suite, wanted to, pose the question again, how do you take employee feedback on the handbook? And, especially, when you roll out some new program, how do you gather that feedback and manage that relationship?
I can answer that. So we do pulse surveys, even though we are small. We've been doing pulse surveys quarterly, and that's my favorite way to get employee feedback. First of all, because it's anonymous, so they are going to be more honest in their feedback because they're not giving it to their manager, they're not giving it to our CEO, and they're not giving it to me if I haven't built a trusting relationship with them yet. So pulse surveys are really important. But for me, also being a team of one, this will not always be sustainable, but it is sustainable right now. I take the time every quarter or every other quarter to talk to every single employee. And I ask them very specific stay questions. Why are they staying? And then take that feedback. And so if there's feedback that is one-off, I'll keep it in my back pocket, keep an eye on it. But for feedback that we see consistently, that's really where I want to dig in and see if our policies are equitable or they're reflective of what our team is looking for out of the organization. As well. So that's usually like my favorite way is just getting it in front of them and actually talking to them to understand how their experience is.
Yeah, and for the I guess more early stage founders here, it might just I'm just curious about where you find these questions, because yes, you can sit down and try and build a survey yourself, but are there like where are places that folks can find these questions or pre-built things?
Absolutely. So for me, we use Lattice internally for our people like performance management and people success platform. So Lattice has a beautiful resource library full of questions like this that you can tailor towards your employees, your managers, things like that. Also, work smarter, not harder. Use AI. It will give you good answers or good questions as well that you can use. So that's a good way. And then for me, using Slack workspaces, I belong to a couple of Slack workspaces, and actually asking your peers in the space, like, hey, what stay questions have you been asking? What exit interviews have you been asking for questions that have gotten you really thoughtful and positive feedback or critical feedback that you've been able to act on?
Got it. Yeah, and I'm looking at the chat here. On that, Zarina, Pooja, Dustin, Emma, feel free to chime in on this. I want to address Benjamin Hall's question here. Just using AI to craft a handbook. I think expanding that to just potentially using AI to help in any part of the sort of HR legal process. Thoughts, experience?
I love using ChatGPT. I use it almost every day. I wouldn't recommend, doing a whole handbook with it, but I think it's really great for, I'm sure we all have this issue where you have to write a policy or you have to, and you can't get started because you have too many things to do. You can't like clear your head. So you can put like some bullet points into ChatGPT and ask it, help me write a policy. Or even, with the questions, you could put in a question and say, rephrase this in 10 different ways, and then kind of pick from that and use that to it's just a really helpful drafting tool.
Yeah, something that I've done with some policies is actually, especially since I use ChatGPT sometimes too, and since it is a sort of a like prompt-based program, being able to feed it certain information first before asking that information. So basically, it's like talking to a person and saying, "Hey, here's my expectation of like what answer I want. Can you give me something like that?" So, for instance, I was playing around with telling this instance of ChatGPT, "Hey, here are our culture guidelines." or here are our brand guidelines. From there, can you write me, this policy using that brand voice? And the outputs were a little cheesy, but hey, they were a great place to start, to be able to wordsmith that later on. And it's just kind of fun to see, what it's going to pop out, and it was pretty good. I've used it for some even some copywriting work, which has been kind of cool. So we've gone through a fair amount of our questions that we've had prepared. I guess the final question that I will ask our panelists before we go to various questions and situations is, once you've rolled out a policy, what happens when you want to adjust a policy? I think the part of this here is, how do you roll something back that you have given, especially in the times of, COVID, in terms of, a weird funding climate. Something that you may have had funding or support for earlier may not be something that you are able to support.
I think what Dustin said about transparency is really important. We are having to edit our expense policy. Like, I know for a fact that that is happening, and I have a hard date of when that needs to launch. And I already have employees who unfortunately are being denied their transactions. And so it's already coming to me like, hey, this was denied. So being transparent, letting them know, XYZ, this is why we're moving this. So I think just being transparent, being upfront, also using my managers as champions as well, to say, like, as a heads up, you're going to start getting questions, like, please let them know that this is why we're changing it. This is when they can expect. I'm very much like a why, how, when person. Like, that's very much how I draft like any communication to my team. So I want them to understand the why of why we're doing it. So this is just a policy that happens to be going through a change. So my team can expect, like, this is why it's happening. This is when it's happening. This is how it's happening. So that's really important to me, is just to have like open communication. It also helps to build trust. HR can be like a tricky function within an organization. People don't inherently trust it. It's got a bad rep. So having that transparency to say, like, I feel your pain, but this is a legal reason why we have to roll back this policy. Like, I can't do anything about the taxes or the IRS. And so unfortunately, like, we're going to have to make a couple of iterations on this so that, also employees aren't liable in this case, as well as the organization.
Sure. Yeah. And Emma, with your experience with various handbooks, I'm sure you've had to make some changes every now and again.
Yeah. I was going to say, whether it's like rolling things back or making additions, or I'm sure all of us here have gotten feedback from employees of, I don't like this certain policy, or why did we do it this way, or whatever, right? Whatever that may be. Handbooks are not always the sexiest topic, but that said, I think that employees are appreciating much more having something in writing, because then it gives them faith in the fairness, right? It's like, okay, well, the reason we put this in writing is that, we want to treat everyone equitably here. We want this to apply to everyone, right? And just because it might not work for you, and I totally get that, and that's valid, right? We need to make something that's going to work for everybody and be flexible. We can obviously, like, flex up or down from there, but we have to think about everybody, right? And I feel that conversation goes a lot better, than because who doesn't, people get that a little bit more in terms of, like, okay, maybe it's not my favorite thing, but it's fair. And I want to work at some place that I know that everyone is being treated fairly. So that's kind of how I try to frame any conversation in terms of whether it's, specific feedback or making a policy change and people having a reaction to that.
Yeah, definitely very important. Thank you, Emma. So I have a couple situations here for our panel, and feel free to answer as you do. So as the company goes about doing its thing, how would you respond if an employee came up to you and said, hey, like, I disagree with, like, this company's action, whatever that may be? It goes against, various things that are outlined in the handbook. How do you manage that sort of conversation? Because there are some folks on the poll earlier that mentioned, hey, like, our handbook could do with an update, and so things that you may have set in motion previously either may not be true, or may just not be something that's on your radar when you are making a decision.
I think I would, try to be curious first and say like, okay, what about it did you not like, right? And then kind of default back to, I also believe in like as being as transparent as possible. Obviously in legal, you can't always be, but you can be pretty transparent, right? And then just sometimes you have to say like, well, because of this person's privacy, or because, imagine if you were in this situation, we can't tell you exactly like what happened here, but like, I promise I would not let something that was not done correctly happen, like at this company.
And sometimes it's not, yeah, like I'm thinking of a good example that we've recently been thinking through. It's around, um, throughout 2020 with Black Lives Matter, big push of DEI, and then also seeing like counters to that with Florida legislation around like the Stop Woke Act. We've had employees say, well, why aren't we out there, showcasing more advocacy around topics that matter? There's all this stuff being decided around abortion. There's all this stuff being decided around, a lot of highly contested, political, controversial topics, and all rightfully so. And so I think that what we've had to do is communicate out to our workforce and our employees about when we choose to do that and why we choose to do it. And when we don't, it's not that we don't care. It's that, we have specific guidelines that our leadership has set around when we will comment on something, when we will take a stand on something, and sort of how we tie that all back. So I think even from, because so many of us employ folks who are very passionate, whether we're advocates or in our personal lives, there's things that matter dearly to us. We recognize that, and it doesn't mean that we as a company internally cannot like come together through our affinity groups and discuss certain matters and topics, or bring things up to discuss as large groups during all hands. But when it comes to like how we showcase support, or what's perceived as not support by choosing to not say something, which is still a decision, helping employees kind of understand some of those dynamics and things and so forth, has been an interesting kind of thing that we've been navigating, I feel like, over the last 18 months. And so being more clear about why we're doing what we're doing when we do say something, and when we don't, here's kind of the business reason why we're not, writing or releasing an article or pushing out a formal statement about X.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. So we've got about 10 minutes left in this session. I do want to transition over to the wonderful questions that we've been getting in chat. And for those of you in here in person, we'd be happy to take those after I start with Mr. Kevin Fanning's question. Kevin is curious about how you wonderful panelists balance that dry legalese of maybe HR and or the sort of, or just legalese in general, with creating a document that is engaging and accessible. So how do you tote that balance?
I think you have that opening statement in most policies that says like the purpose or the introduction. So that's a good opportunity to, speak in a more conversational tone and tie it back to your company's values. And it, it doesn't all have to be super dry. And then if you have a lawyer that's willing to work with you on it, literally going through and just saying like, do I need to say hereby? Do I need to say like therefore, like all these, or is there a simpler way to say this that doesn't lose its meaning?
Sure. Yeah, that wordsmithing is pretty cool. Just to be able to find that exact way of saying things. Though it can be tough to, because you might get caught up on that because you're going to be reading this over and over again. It's not exactly what we want. But Dustin, to your point, just not doing something or not saying something is also doing something to your company there. And want to turn over to the room. Any questions here that we could get a mic to and whatnot? Yes. Oh, thank you, Puck.
Does anyone else? I don't want to go first unless I have to.
No, you're good. Go for it.
All right. Well, so I've been with a couple of companies that have had some really great policies and really great core values. Some other companies where they've had some really good core values and on paper. So I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions for, I don't know, just making sure that the company lives up to the expectations that they set for themselves, either on their website with their core values, or just, this is how we do business, this is why we do business. Because it's really easy to say we're going to be about this stuff, but when things get tough, I find it to be hard to live up to those values because it requires you to sacrifice a little bit. So that's my question.
Sure, I can answer that. We try to tie our core values into like our everyday sort of activities. So one of the big ways is definitely tying them into reviews. Now reviews do happen for us biannually, but asking your managers, asking your peer reviewers to talk about a value related to the reviewee. We also are rolling out values awards for our all hands. So we'll be having folks vote on which values they're seeing embodied in their actual team members or their direct reports, whoever it might be. And then we'll have like prizes or store, like a little store that they can choose kind of what they want. That's an idea I've carried over from another organization. Also just ensuring, again, that managers are champions for your culture, ensuring that they also uphold your values and are acting in that way as much as possible. We try to also employer branding, talk about it. I think that's really important as well, is to lean into employer branding and really talk about your values more frequently so that your employees are remembering them. We just did a refresh because when I joined Easy Llama, nobody could tell me what our values were. I was like, does anybody know like what our values are? And nobody knew. So I grabbed every person from every function within the org and had them help me refresh the values. And they're much more aligned to the behavior that I see in the team and that they see in each other. And I think that's really important as well. So try to tie it into one-on-ones, reviews, all hands, things like that, where the team is connecting and collaborating more frequently. I think it's a good way to help uphold those values.
Yeah, I think accountability is another key piece of it. Like, we've made some pretty big shifts since July 1st. We, as I'd mentioned, are fully remote, but once a year as a company, we come together for a week we call Fountain Forward. And so this year, the theme was very much around design and around business excellence and operations. So how do we as a company continue to be able to move really quickly with making decisions, and what are some of the things we think we need to start doing and holding each other accountable of, which might differ from how we've previously done business, let's say the week before we all got together. So coming out of that, some things were, we spend a lot of time in meetings. So our CEO, a week after our event, worked with us to say, I want to eliminate all one-on-ones. We're like, wow, folks are going to respond to that in a very big way. Some are going to be jumping up and down. Some are probably going to be like very upset or not excited about that, because one-on-ones are really important to them. So it was about finding a balance, with some of those like changes in thoughts around like how we as a business should be working and operating, but recognizing that we wanted to move to sort of adopt these change in values and change in sort of operational business practices quickly. So we launched like what we call Fountain Year of the Quarter, and it's us highlighting, the behaviors that we really want to see further emulated throughout the company, and taking opportunities during all hands to ensure that one big reason for that was because we spend so much time in meetings that are unstructured, that have no purpose. We're not reaching decisions, and so before you know it, an hour's gone by and folks feel like that hasn't been the most effective use of their time. So the accountability piece comes in is, don't put a meeting on someone's calendar, because if you put a meeting on the calendar and there's no agenda, there's no pre-reads, there's no whatever, you will become known as that person that holds unproductive meetings. Nobody wants that title in a company of 200, right? So, kind of putting that accountability out there and saying like, this is what the direction we're moving to. And we hope folks are on board with that. And if not, there's conversations that we can have to either make adjustments for various reasons, accommodations that maybe need to be met, hear concerns. So I think just providing that open dialogue, but finding ways to really model it live in front of large audiences and in small audiences of the company is important.
Yeah, and from an employee's perspective, I mean, the distilling like the two main themes of this is, that's transparency and accountability. If I put myself in the shoes of an employee and I'm not seeing that transparency, I'm not seeing that accountability, you'll have to make your own decision of do I want to try and voice some changes, or do I want to hopefully not, but find somewhere else that does have that transparency and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you guys view the document as an offensive document or a defensive document? And when I mean offensive, like use it as a tool to attract employees or communicate with employees. And then the second part of that would be, If you had to get one section of it right, based on your experience, what's the section you want to make sure you get right?
Got it. Two-part question. So is a handbook used more offensively or defensively? And then from there, like, what is one specific section to really nail?
I would say, I mean, the best defense is a good offense, right? Or is it the other way around? I think offensive in terms of like you want to get ahead of it. You want to convey a clear message that is consistent. And I would say information security policies are ones you don't want to mess up, and also anti-harassment, non-discrimination. That one you want to have like solid.
Same as Irina, it's definitely offensive. We want to ensure that we are equitable in how we're treating our employees, make sure that they understand the behaviors that they should be modeling and sort of how the business runs. And for me, I think sexual harassment, discrimination, very important. I think for me, just overall, the theme of equity, ensuring that folks feel like they are provided an equitable experience and that they are being treated and valued the same as their peers, is very, very important to me.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, and then on, maybe like the less legal side is what are the important, 3 important things about culture that folks really need to know, or referring back to help guide their everyday. And again, the reason I emphasize that is because we're fully remote. And so if we don't provide that direction, then folks are kind of left up to their own devices. And that's where we see, a wide range of different employee relations encounter. So that it's really used as an expectation and accountability set up front early on when hiring, or just annually when we're revisiting it, and encouraging employees to be reviewing it.
Yeah, I'd say, it's good that a handbook within and of itself is inherently both offensive and defensive. But at the end of the day, it is important to have some sort of feedback loop into that. How can this handbook be an evolving and changing record of the culture and compliance at a company? To put a rough point on that. Another question here.
Do I need the mic or no?
You sound great.
We had an interesting situation where our TA team largely does not sit in the US and have started to request the handbook so that they can give that to potential candidates, because that's part of our culture and they really want to share that with people. But I don't want to send a 120-page document that has 35 states worth of PFMLA leave. And so I've distilled that document into something much smaller that's a little more attractive, I guess more of an offensive document for TA. Do you have any experience with that? Do you see any legal pitfalls with that? Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, so experience working with the global handbook or iteration of that. Yes, specifically using the lens of TA as like an offensive document. Thank you.
So we have,
Oh, no, sorry. I think it depends on like the nature of the question. Are they looking because they want to understand the culture of the company, or are they too shy to ask about PTO and holidays and stuff? So they just want more information on that without, being like, I don't want to ask about PTO on a job interview. So I like your idea of kind of having something smaller that's maybe even geared towards candidates, because you're right, they don't need to see like, I don't know, your like IT policy, or they don't need to see a lot of the, what more boilerplate policies.
I was going to say, yeah, I agree. Sending sending a long handbook can be a little bit intimidating, but it's all in the framing, right? So anytime anyone asks me to see our handbook, or when we do a reissue, I always put a note out there that it's like, hey, this is a long, intense document. And the reason for that is because we have so many different people in different locations or different situations, and not all of it is going to apply to you. In fact, probably, this percentage is going to apply to you. But again, just emphasizing that it's about fairness